and welcome to another episode of Voice of Nursing podcast. We're so glad you could join us today. Today, I am joined by the stunning and amazing Charne Daniels, and she's just going to chat through her life as a speech and language therapist. So, how are you doing today, Charne?
I am actually very happy and excited to be here and talking to you today. What about you? How are you?
I'm great. The weather is terrible here in Cape Town, but give or take. But I'm sure it's probably not the same weather there at the moment.
I'm sure it looks exactly the same, and this is London we're talking about.
All right. Okay. Yeah. I've been to London recently and the weather was just not good.
It's not the South African summer.
No, not at all. So tell me, how does a South African land up in the UK? Just off the cuff.
Well, I think me personally, in the back of my head, I was always like, I would love the opportunity to go and work overseas one day. And one day I was in a lecture room and somebody came in and they told us about this company and they're offering students who finish their ComServe in South Africa an opportunity to go and work in London. It's a great company. And I took them up on their offer after I finished my community service here. And
Mm.
voila, that's how I ended up in London. But yeah, it's definitely been a journey.
Now, I'm
Yeah.
sure that the culture there is completely different to what you experienced here.
Definitely, I would say very fast paced. Number one, it's not that South Africa is not fast paced, but definitely I feel like in terms of just traveling, for example, it's like I feel like I'm racing every day just to get to work,
Mm,
and also the amount of new things that are happening. So many different cultures from all over the world, and yeah,
mm.
definitely I do love London for that reason. So yeah, definitely a
And
little.
you, yeah, and you studied here in South Africa.
Yes, so I studied at UCT. Yeah, I think in terms of my education, I really enjoyed UCT a lot. The medical
Mm.
campus was amazing. They have one of the best speech and language therapy programs. So I definitely would recommend anyone who's looking into speech and language therapy to check out the courses and things like that.
Mm. Yeah, so just leaning in from the studies, tell us about your career journey in the healthcare industry. So you started out in UCT. Where did that go from just there? I know you mentioned a little bit about how you got recruited to go abroad, but yeah, just tell us about the differences working here compared to there.
Yeah, I think okay, let's start with the studying because I feel like those are two different things
Mm,
in South Africa compared to the UK in general. In South Africa, we have to kind of study everything. We've got to be prepared. If a patient walks in or a client walks in South Africa, if they had a stroke, if they have a feeding and swallowing problem, a stutter, or any kind of language or communication difficulty, you've got to be able to assess that person and provide them with intervention, etc. So you've got to have those skills ready, locked,
mm,
and loaded.
yeah.
Whereas in the UK, you've got to specialize. So currently, right now, I am busy specializing in a specific field, but I first have to prove that I'm competent in that field. So at the end of the day, I feel like, I do have these skills already, but there's actually so much more to it. So I think
Mm.
that's the difference in the studying. So I definitely think South Africa is a little bit more advanced in that way, even though you specialize.
Interesting.
Yes, I actually feel like we are so much more prepared to handle any kind of situation, and we cope so well under any kind of pressure because we have to have those skills before we even go to work. While we're studying, they embed those skills in us.
Yeah.
So when I got here and I faced maybe any tricky or challenging situations, I was just like, you know what? I kind of know a little bit about this, so I can give this person this kind of information and guidance. But I will say that the courses and, just all the resources that they have here is amazing. So yeah,
Mm,
that's the differences between the studying. And then a little bit about the working is, yeah, I feel like in terms of our delivery of services in South Africa, I feel like speech therapists, if they are given the opportunity, can do more, not only in the health sector, but also in the education system. And I think that's something that UK is they've kind of got it a little bit,
yeah,
where
yeah,
in almost in most schools that you go to, they make sure that if a child needs speech and language therapy, that child gets that service. Even if they have to go to the government to apply for funding, the government will find a way to get that child that service, basically. And they track you and they say, listen, did you provide this child with X amount of services, and what was your impact? And that's brilliant, because at the end of the day, you can really impact a child's life. So personally, I do like that about London, but it is also a thing of, in South Africa, you've got more of a multidisciplinary team.
mm,
So you've got the occupational therapist, audiology, physio, everyone. Whereas here in the UK, it's a referral system. So if you see something pop up, refer, and it takes a long time to get that service. So there's pros and cons for both countries. So me being, I'm fortunate enough to have worked a little bit in both now, London and back home in South Africa, in one or two provinces. I feel like if we kind of took a little bit of this and a little bit of this, it would be amazing, to be honest.
yeah. I
But there are good.
suppose, yeah, I suppose the interdisciplinary sort of sense of South Africans' work ethic, it comes hand in hand with our culture and how diverse we are and how well we just kind of cooperate with one another. So, I
Absolutely.
mean, to put that into perspective, it's quite interesting. But take me back, sort of tell me what inspired you to go down this career path? What was young Shanae's feelings and thoughts about, I want to become a language and speech therapist?
To be honest, I never knew what speech and language therapy was at all growing up. I never heard of it, until a situation happened in my family where one of my family members had a stroke. And then speech and language therapy popped up, and they're like, no, your aunt's got to go for speech and language therapy because, her speech has been affected, her language has been affected due to the stroke. And I was like, oh, so what do they do? And then from that moment, I decided to do a job shadowing during high school, and
Mm,
I fell in love. When I tell you, I went into the hospital and I was trying to do things with the speech and language therapist, watching her interact with all different types of cases. I'm talking tracheostomies, I'm talking stroke patients, even cancer patients that she was seeing. I was just like, I had no idea speech therapists can like cross the border like this. So it was amazing. And then I fell in love with it. I applied to study it, and that's how my journey started. But it started from home. And
mm.
yeah, so you find the most beautiful things, I think, from your family. And yeah, that's how my passion kind of started.
Yeah, it strikes me as interesting. Everybody that I've interviewed recently have all come from an authentic place, an intimate place that kind of reignites or just ignites that in the first place, that passion to want to do something for the rest of your life. So
Oh,
there's definitely a shared experiences between healthcare. It doesn't matter where you are, if you're just a doctor yourself, a nursing assistant. But I know that you just mentioned something about your ongoing for speech and language therapy for a stroke. Um, you know, Barring that in mind, what other specific challenges have you ever encountered in your previous role or in your current roles?
well, I actually, thinking about it, back in South Africa, I think a challenge for me personally was getting the services out to people. So during ComServe, basically, what we'd have to do is we'll travel to different towns, and we try to provide speech and language therapy services. And a lot of the time, I found that people just don't know what speech and language therapy is, and they probably just thought, this is just, I think maybe it's a waste of my time, and they didn't know how our role could help them, basically. And along that journey, I had to really advocate for speech and language therapy in the rural areas. And I'm not just talking about maybe your KZN or Johannesburg. I'm talking about even here in the Western Cape. I found a lot of the times if you go into the rural areas, they'll be like, what is this all about? But once you
Mm,
actually advocate what you do and how you can help, people, they come and they ask and they are interested and they learn, they're willing to learn. So that challenge of, getting people to understand and, come and ask for help basically, and knowing where and like what to do is so important. But that was initially a challenge, working, and then the language barrier. I think even though I grew up in South Africa and we took English as a home language, when
mm,
I came even to London, there is still a bit of a language barrier, but also, I think just anywhere you go, if you're going to work in environments where there's multiple languages, or there's a dominant language in a specific area, you have to equip yourself with some type of language skills, because at the end of the day, I'm a speech and language therapist. So it's my job essentially. So that was a
yeah.
bit challenging. It was a bit challenging in both, South Africa and here, because back home, you know, I was in a Zulu community and I didn't speak a drop of Zulu. And what I did is I took a course, I read some books, and most importantly, I spoke to the people. I tried to talk and learn from other healthcare workers. And, that is so beautiful about South Africa, essentially. People are willing to help you learn. But this side as well, you think it's just predominantly English. When I got here and I saw, okay, I've got to deal with this Ukrainian person and this Chinese person and maybe this Nigerian person, I was just like, "Ooh, I'm not too familiar with the language, but
Mm,
they offer more services once again." And so it's about accessing those services. And I found that a little bit difficult. Um, so yeah, that was some of the challenges, but I definitely, I was able to adapt. And I think as anyone in the rehabilitation, field, you must be able to adapt and be able to learn. Yeah,
mm. Yeah, and
definitely.
I suppose it comes down to, building a relationship with those people, being on their level and or just, allowing yourself to be able to communicate effectively. It really shows that they're being heard and they're being understood. And I suppose that's what's very important as well, because you're responsible for someone and you need to make them feel safe, and understand them.
Yes, to add on, actually, maybe to one of the challenges, I would say, you know, a lot of people don't actually understand how much emotions, goes into healthcare services. I mean, it could maybe just even be from social work, a social worker to a nurse, but you take on your patients' feelings and their experiences. They're coming to you when they like at a very vulnerable point. So I think one of the challenges was learning how to separate my emotions as a human being, as a person, and as a health
Mm,
professional, because you've got to maintain that level of professionalism, but at the same time, it's like you are a person that cares about the well-being and health of another human being. So that was a challenge, and it's specifically difficult for all new, um, therapists and healthcare workers. That journey alone is quite, um, a challenge. But once you overcome it and you find that balance, so yeah.
yeah, and I suppose you've been able to sort of utilize your skills and become intuitive and actually just learn from that and be so much more better at communicating and
Oh,
hurdling
yes.
those challenges.
100%. There's still times where I feel like even here in London, I'm like, I don't think they understand me. Despite my job, I'm like, maybe let's look at this again. How can I make them understand and feel safe, and go from there? So every
Mm.
day is a new challenge essentially, but you
Exactly.
know we get
So
through it.
tell me, Shanae, do you mostly work with children or do you work with adult patients or a mixture?
So yeah, I am only working with the pediatric population. So once again, you've got to specialize if you want to
Mm,
work in any kind of field. So my field right now is just speech and language and communication, sorry, in the pediatric field. And then on top of that, if I want to go into a different field, I've got to apply and things like that.
mm,
So, but back home, I was working with everyone, the whole range. So yeah, so back in South Africa, you've got to be able to see both the pediatric population as well as the adult
mm.
population. Yeah.
Yeah. And tell me, what's your approach to working with children? Like, how does Shanae approach a patient at a very young age and vulnerable, not really understanding what's going on?
I think, when working with children, you've got to come down to their level. I know that sounds maybe, it can be misinterpreted, but
Mm,
able to come down to their level and first get to know them. I think, when you work with adults, you can just be like, sir, ma'am, ask a bunch of questions and say, this is how I'm going to help you. But with a child, they will assess you first and see if you are someone that they like. So when I approach children, and especially children who have difficulty communicating, I stop in my tracks and I get to know them first, and I build a good relationship with each patient, and then I go from there, and then I talk to their parents and I begin my assessment. And what I like to do is I just feel assessments shouldn't only be a 1 day thing, right? Because
mm,
if I
mm,
just assess a child on 1 day, that's a small screenshot of what that child is like. So I like to come back and look at the child on different days. Children are essentially people as well in a way. So
yeah, of
every
course, of
day they've
course.
got different emotions. And so, as well as assessing them in different environments, children are so different at home compared to when they come into a different room, a speech therapy room. So I like to
Mm,
feel build a relationship with children, right? And I mean, even if I'm talking about maybe a child who has a little bit more severe needs, like a child with autism, you are not going to get anything done the first time you see
mm,
that kitty. It's going to take you some time before you build a relationship. So my approach is always just to first get to know the child, do a thorough assessment, and then provide advice and intervention. And I always advocate for parents to listen to workshops, and go to smaller events and discussions, or they have therapy groups for parents alone. I think when you come to speech therapy, there's like a negative connotation that there's something wrong with your child, and that's not always the case. Um,
mm.
it's just little things, and sometimes they are big things, but with the right help and the right services, you can go far. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah, you mentioned earlier on that every day sort of presents a challenge, and I'm sure that's for everyone across the board. People interact and encounter very different situations that you're not fully aware of. Tell me, how do you combat that? What kind of research do you do? What's your process to kind of understand on a more methodical level, to approach these new challenges that you haven't really come before?
So I think all kind of rehabilitation professionals, I think all health professionals, they are required to join a health professions council. I think in South Africa it's called the HPCSA, uh,
Mm,
and then in the UK it's called the HCPC. And both of these councils, they have a requirement where you've got to maintain a certain amount of points by reading articles, doing workshops, events, and that kind of contributes to this lifelong learning, right? So I think all professionals have to maintain that standard basically. And then on top of that, when you have your own interest, like for me, for example, my interest is pediatric dysphagia, and that's just swallowing and feeding difficulties in young children. So what I'm currently just looking at is applying to study that a little bit more and do some more courses, etc. But yeah, I think definitely um, research is very important for all health professionals. I think if you are providing a service, it should be evidence-based practice, basically. So
Of
it should
course,
be
yeah.
based, yeah, it should be based on things that are happening. You've got to keep up with the different changes. Assessments, they change all the time because for example, how can you use a English assessment on somebody that's not English, right? And that's a problem in South Africa. For example, you might have a English assessment, but how can you assess somebody who's Zulu speaking or Xhosa, for example?
Mm,
So you've got to make sure that whatever kind of service you provide is evidence based. I 100% make sure that I keep up to date with all new things in my field. And there are different types of websites, like Sashler, for example, that provide you with help to access those research articles or events that are happening. Yeah.
mm. So I think maybe just for the newcomers to speech and language therapy and those who are
Mhm.
really interested in taking this and pursuing it, maybe you can provide us with an example of a particularly challenging case that you've worked on and how you've addressed it, sort of in a pragmatic sense.
I think if I think about a challenging case, um, and it really just depends on the type of area that you're working in, because there's many areas
Mm,
in speech and language therapy. But I definitely think a challenge for me across the border has been dealing with parents, actually. I
mm,
think a lot of the time, because I work predominantly now I work with children. So a lot of the times I find that parents are very, you know, they are the decision makers essentially of everything that happens with the child. So I think one of the things I've done when approaching parents is after my assessment, I also talk to the parents and help them deal with their emotions a little bit around the children's,
yeah, of course.
situation. And then on top of that, I like to set a goal. And I think I would like to see more speech and language therapists actually sit down with parents or even children when they're a little bit older and say, what is something that you would like to achieve from speech therapy? I'll take one of my stammering cases. I had maybe a very severe little kitty who, they just didn't like the stammer and it was actually just affecting their mental health at the end of the day. And I said, what's one thing that we can achieve at the end of the year? And, the kitty just said, I really want to stop pressing hard on the table. And by the end of 3 months, not only did he stop pressing on the table, he was able to control how fast he was speaking. So, starting with goals is so important, and showing children how others have achieved something is even more important. So, that's one thing that I do when I face, maybe challenging cases and challenging parents. Yeah, but that's just one situation.
Yeah, of
There's
course.
many more, of course, but yeah, that's my advice or my top tip.
And I suppose dealing with children on a day-to-day basis, some of them probably come in with very severe cases and some not so much. But I think for the more severe cases, how do you go about approaching and collaborating with other healthcare professionals in order to provide that comprehensive patient care?
So I think I definitely will say South Africa is amazing at this part of the health professional spectrum because they make sure that there is a MDT, right? So there's somebody from every kind of profession. And I think when I was working in South Africa, I was talking to the audiologist, I was talking to the physiotherapist or the OT, and I was able to say, listen, I've got a patient, I'm going to refer them to you. And on that very same day, maybe they could access the service if they were there, for example. So we are able to approach, patients holistically in South Africa. We're very good at that. So when I came over to the UK, they do have those services available. However, I think what's different is although you may make the referral and provide them with the evidence, it just takes them a long time, and sometimes it's just um, yeah, the process of getting somebody to go as well here in the
Mm,
UK and has become a little bit more difficult in certain areas. But yeah, so I think it's very important for healthcare professionals to work together. I think most of my severe cases that I had, I've learned so much from an occupational therapist by just observing them in their sessions, and just looking at how they deal with children who have sensory needs, for example. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I can actually use this in my session and add language onto it. And I've built such good relationships with, for example, occupational therapists. I've done sessions together with them, and I've built such good relationships with audiologists. I often get referrals for children with speech sound or articulation difficulties, and my first thing is, did they have a hearing assessment? A lot of the time, we don't do that early detection in young children, and by the time they come to 5 6, they're sounding a little bit different. Their parents think
mm,
they're wrong, but actually they just didn't pick up a hearing problem. So it's very important for us to all work together. I can't stress that more, and I definitely think in dealing with cases that are severe, we need to do more of that. Look at patients holistically and make sure that we are targeting every area of need of that patient or client.
mm. So it's very clear and evident that you're very passionate about what you do. I think what you've expressed in the answer that you provided today, you have such a fire for working with children. And I just want to know, what's the long-term goals as a language and speech therapist?
Um, okay, well, I can't speak for all speech therapists, but for myself, I've got a few 5-year kind of long term goals and a 10-year long term goal. I
As one
think
must always.
you know I think my 5-year, sorry about that, I think my 5-year long-term goals would definitely have to be that I would like to study a little bit further and get my master's degree, and definitely specialize in pediatric dysphagia and start practicing more. And I definitely would like to move up a little bit in my company. One thing I like about London is that in the companies or in their structures, they've got these things called professional development plans, where they actually want you to develop your skills and not just stay in the same place. So right now I'm a newly qualified therapist in the country, but by the end I might be a supervisor or a team leader in pediatric dysphagia, and that's kind of what I want to build up to. And yeah, so those are my my 5-year long-term goals. And then my 10-year long-term goal is definitely I would love to come back home and start my own kind of practice, that also has all of the health professionals in it, like a OT, a audio, even
Mm,
a physio, and possibly a educational psychologist. I think I've been very inspired by my company that I'm working for. It's called Words First Limited, and the lady who's the director of the company, Amanda Davis, she's actually South African. So I actually look up to her so much, and I would love to implement what she's done overseas back home, right? In a smaller community, and just provide those basic services, because I feel you know, if I mean, as a South African and I came from Mitchell's Plain, if I could see these services provided in a small community like Mitchell's Plain, or just those smaller communities,
Mm,
I think there would be such a big difference. And I know there are services that are being provided in these smaller areas, but I definitely would like, as a speech and language therapist, I would like to see more speech and language therapists in our, not only our healthcare system but our education system, and having people feel that they are able to come and receive a service and actually them seeing a change. So yeah, that's a dream. That's a dream. The long
well,
term
I
goal.
mean, it's a feasible dream, and I think we need a lot of healthcare professionals here to assist us in South
Yeah,
Africa. I think we're in a very precarious position, but there's so much potential, and there's
yeah.
so much to love about these people and this country. It's outstanding. But putting that on the side, how does Shanae balance work life? What do you prioritize? What do you do to be able to break away from work and or are you just a workaholic?
No, no. I try to balance my life. I'm not gonna lie. This has been a actual journey. Work-life balance and having a bit of a social life, and then having a little bit of an exercise regime. I'm not gonna lie. I don't like going to the gym, but I found something that I like doing at home. So I definitely advocate for, even if it's just young women, but all, everyone, men, women, everyone basically, find something that you like doing, in terms of exercise.
Mm,
When I had stress, dealing with work stress or maybe even just personal stress, I actually found that I enjoy working out a little bit. And yeah, having a work life balance is actually so important. Look, I am new to working. I've been working maybe for 3 years now, but I still feel very new in the working field. And these days where I feel like I contribute more to my work life, these days where I feel like I contribute more to my social life. So that has been a learning journey. I'm at a place now where I can say I find that I have a balance. But to people out there that struggle with it, I feel like they just have to kind of find that sweet spot
mm,
where planning the time in your day is so important. I think for me, it was my time management. I wasn't good with the time management side of things. I would just wake up, work, 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 go out, go out, go out, then maybe not so much my health. And then later, my health took a bit of a dip, and it woke me up, and I said, hey, I've got to look after my health. And I mean, I'm a healthcare professional, but at the end of the day,
mm,
these things get sidetracked, especially if you have a family to look after. It's like, where's my time flying? I've been working for 8 hours. I've got to get 8 hours of sleep. I've got to make sure that somewhere in the remaining hours, do I have time to exercise, look after this, make sure this is done. So time management, I would say, is my advice to anyone um, trying to find that work and having a fun lifestyle and maintaining their health. I definitely would say plan out your day as much as possible, and try to be consistent, because once you break that consistency, yeah,
mm. Yeah, I think it's super important. I'm doing a lot of research on this burnout stage for healthcare professionals, and
yeah,
it's a global phenomenon.
yeah,
So I think I mean, I just take myself for instance, I need to prioritize me time and things that I enjoy doing as opposed to being completely focused in on work. And it's
yeah,
super important because you're not as productive at the end of the day if you're burned out. And in patient care, that is, I can imagine that you need to be on your A game all the time. You're dealing with other people's lives. Um, so
100%.
yeah, thanks, Shanae. It was lovely to chat to you. This brings us to the end of our episode of Voice of Nursing. And yeah, where can we find you on social media? Do you have a handle?
Yes. So Well, I'll give you two. So related to speech and language therapy, we have our Words First Limited. It's literally spelled just like that. And then my handle is Charne Tracy. It's spelled. Would you like me to spell it out, maybe, or would it be
Yeah,
attachment?
sure.
Yeah. So maybe just click on the link and have a look at my socials. And if you ever want to ask me a question or do another interview, I'd be happy to, just say hi to everyone and answer any questions.
Amazing. Well, I'll definitely take you up on that offer. I loved chatting you today. So
Oh, thank you.
that brings us to the end of this episode.